Right, well, I think we'll start because we've got a busy agenda. So good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Nicaragua Solidarity Campaign Action Group. This webinar entitled A Better World is Possible, Nicaragua Reduces Poverty Despite Threats from the United States. My name is Julie Lamin, and it's my pleasure to be chairing this meeting this evening, as I'm co-chair of the Nicaragua Solidarity Campaign Action Group. I'm really grateful to you joining this evening's webinar, and particularly not just for coming along this evening, but for your ongoing support for Nicaragua, whether that's through a union affiliation or through individual membership. And if you have not already joined as an individual member, could I urge you to do so? The address will be, details to join will be in the chat. And also, if you haven't yet affiliated with your union, or your union hasn't yet affiliated, that too is really, really important to us. And we're delighted that affiliations and membership support is growing, but the more support in these difficult times that we can receive in Nicaragua Solidarity Campaign Action Group, the better, and the better for the people of Nicaragua. So please do join, encourage your friends and family to join, and certainly also for your union to affiliate. So thank you for that. Just to say a few technical details, that the webinar is being recorded. So if you don't want to appear in the recording, please just close down your camera. And also thank you very much for being on mute during the presentations of the speakers. There will be opportunities for questions at the end. So when it comes to the questions, please feel free, if you have a question during the presentations, please pop that into the chat and we'll try and make sure that they're presented to the speakers afterwards. But similarly, when we reach the question and answer session after the presentations, you've got a little yellow hand down there as one of your actions. So, you know, you can also contribute a question that way as well. So the plan is that each of the three speakers will speak for about 15 minutes. And then we'll have about 20-25 minutes for questions at the end. And it's wonderful that we have three speakers who are in Nicaragua at the moment, who've lived there for a long time, and will be able to share their vast experience and knowledge with us this evening. So again, it's a lovely thing that we have this evening to talk about the successes that Nicaragua is having in reducing poverty. And, you know, I don't think anybody can underestimate just what a great expression that is, success in reducing poverty. So we'll be able to see just what is happening for that in Nicaragua. As I said, my name is Julie Lamin. I am a co-chair of Nicaragua Solidarity Campaign Action Group. And I've been a solidarity activist in Nicaragua from quite a long time ago, from the beginning, really, of the revolution in 1979, during the 80s, first visiting Nicaragua in 1987. And if there's one word that I could share with you that described what Nicaragua was in 1987, the word is devastation. Hospitals had no medicine, no machinery, no x-rays, hardly any of the basics of beds, schools, no books, no desks. A country where people were surviving on the basic rations of rice and beans, and most sadly, people were being killed, young people working in the countryside. So that was my first experience of visiting Nicaragua in 1987. When I revisited in 2017, the word I'd used to describe is liberation, because by then Nicaragua had 10 years of the Sandinista government, and wonderful things were already happening. I went as a teacher with my union, the National Education Union, to support teachers in Nicaragua in this ambitious program for teaching English as a second language. And then I've been on a similar delegations in 2022 and 2024. And each time I am blown away by the progress that has been made. When we went to Nicaragua in 2022, we always meet. We're just an ordinary group of teachers. We're not high level, particularly in the union, but we are always welcomed by Nicaragua's Ministry of Education. And when we were there in 2022, Melba Lopez, the Minister for Secondary Education, said to us, it's simple. In Nicaragua, the policy is for every single government department to reduce poverty. 2 words. And that underpins every action that every department makes. And so that sounds like a simple phrase, but the complexity of how each department makes that happen is something quite wonderful, and you will hear about it tonight. But it means that there's this overlapping, this integration of education with health, with ensuring people have quality food, with quality housing, with road building. So all of these things coming together to make sure that Nicaraguans are not only not only reducing poverty, but actually the benefits to people means that lives are increasingly rich in the things that matter. And when you live in a country like ours in the UK, for those of us who are in the UK, it seems that the objective is the opposite, is to make people richer, a few people richer, at the expense of making everybody else poorer. So it's very refreshing to see just how Nicaragua is about reducing poverty and enriching the lives of the majority of its population. All of this against the background of an attempted coup in 2018, a United States-backed coup in 2018, obviously COVID, hurricanes, climate change. So that is the background to these successes. But we see this striving, this working together of Nicaraguans to improve and attain this common goal of reducing poverty. So I'm going to hand over now to the experts. I'd like to hand over, first of all, just to quickly introduce the people who are with us. We've got Becca Renk, who's speaking to us from Ciudad Sandino in Nicaragua, John Perry from Masaya in Nicaragua, and Nick Hoskins from Managua. So we'll say a little bit more about each of the speakers as we come to them. So first of all, it's my great pleasure to introduce Becca Renk, who has lived in Ciudad Sandino for more than 20 years, and she's working in sustainable community development. Becca is currently the director of the Jubilee House Community and the CDCA's health clinic, and she's coordinator of the Casa Benjamin Linder Solidarity Project. So welcome, Becca, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Julie. It's so nice to be here with all of you this evening. I'm going to share some slides. I would like to show you a little bit about what I'm talking about as we begin. Can everyone see that? And is it moving through okay? Okay. So just to what I'm going to talk about today is a little bit of the advances for Nicaragua's people since 2007. These are advances that I've been able to see myself. I'm originally from Idaho in the US, and I've been here, as Julie said, for 25 years. Together with my Irish husband, I have 2 teenage daughters who are now age 17 and 19, who attended public school in Nicaragua from the age 3 right up to university currently. And I work in Ciudad Sandino in both urban and rural areas in community development, sustainable community development. So to start, I'd like to give a bit of background so that you have an idea of how the situation for the people of Nicaragua has changed in recent years. For 43 years, right up until 1979, Nicaragua lived through a cruel dictatorship which killed 50,000 Nicaraguans, until idealistic young Sandinista revolutionaries managed to overthrow it in 1979. In the 1980s, Nicaragua's revolution managed to redistribute land to poor farmers, teach its people to read and write, eradicate childhood illnesses, and offer its population free education and health care. All of these accomplishments, even while suffering a decade of war with another 50,000 dead, a war organized, funded, and carried out by US-backed Contra, who were intent on killing the Nicaraguan Sandinista revolution. In 1990, the U.S. promised to continue its war unless the Nicaraguan people elected the U.S.-backed candidate. Nicaraguans went to the polls and voted for peace. Excuse me. And they entered into a time where the rich got richer and the poor got even poorer. During this period of US-backed neoliberal governments, from 1990 to 2006, Nicaragua became one of the most unequal countries in the world. I was here during those years, and much of our time was spent just trying to help people survive. In 2006, the Nicaraguan people elected the Sandinista government once again. With the change in government, there came a change in priorities. The National Development Plan is now centered on the fight against poverty. With free education through college, free healthcare, and a host of other emblematic programs, the outlook for the country's citizens has changed dramatically. In agriculture, Nicaragua has reached 90% food sovereignty, with $250,000 of low-interest loans now available to farmers. In economic development, almost 5,000 new cooperatives have been formed since 2006, and 60,000 of the cooperative members are women. In education, 100% free education preschool through college, with 1.2 million school children getting a free meal daily. In healthcare, free universal healthcare with the most extensive and modern hospital network in the region. All of this together means that the poverty rate has been cut in half in just 18 years. The scope and depth of these changes can be hard to fathom from the first world, particularly from within countries that don't prioritize the well-being of their own citizens. It's hard to fathom that Nicaragua's government of reconciliation and national unity has made poverty reduction its #1 goal and allocates resources to meet that goal. In 2025, 56% of the nation's budget goes to social projects, which includes free universal health care and free education. I live in a rural village and work in an impoverished urban area. Let me show you what I've seen with my own eyes with these changes. First, in potable water. When we built our house in a rural village 20 years ago, the only way to get water was to go to the local well every day and wait in line with all the village boys to fill 3 barrels of water for the household and bring them back up the hill by horse or ox cart. At that time, our whole village rationed water for washing, bathing, and drinking. Our neighbors only had chickens and a few cows because they had to carry all the water for livestock. We and our neighbors often paid more than $20 a month for water. 6 years ago, a water project came that now provides water for 2 villages, more than 2,500 people, and we have clean drinking water coming out of the tap in our homes. The water project is administered by a community water and sanitation committee, which has installed meters and collects monthly charges. Our family now pays less than $4 for the water we use. Our neighbors have more cows, pigs, and chickens, and the most grow seasonal gardens, getting starts and seeds for free from government programs, in addition to their fields of beans, corn, and rice. Most homes have installed washing machines, prioritizing women's work. Here, my neighbor Saida stands next to 3 generations of laundry. The stone on the left her grandmother washed clothes on, the cement washstand her mother used, and her own modern electric washing machine. Around the country, Nicaragua has increased access to potable water from 65% in 2006 to 94.5% in 2003. Electrical coverage. Saida can now have that washing machine, not only because she has the water, but also because she has electricity. 20 years ago, like all of our neighbors, we brought our own electricity up from the local well because the electric company wouldn't extend the service to our homes. Even with proper wire, at a distance of 900 meters, the electricity wasn't stable. Every time our fridge kicked on, the computer turned off. Many of our neighbors could barely light one bulb at night because they conducted electricity through pieced-together barbed wire. As of 2014, every house in the village is connected to the grid. Each family pays their monthly electric bill, although nationwide, those with low consumption, which is 80% of the population, receive a subsidy to cover 45% of their bill. Now our neighbors don't only have a light bulb, but they have small shops with refrigerators for selling perishable food and drink. Across the country, where in 2006 just 53% of homes had electricity, now 99.8% of homes have electricity. Nicaragua has also made great strides in renewable energy. In 2006, just 24% of the electricity generated was renewable. Now between 70 to 80% of all electricity generated in any given month is renewable, from wind, geothermal, biomass, solar, and hydroelectric. and Nicaragua is number 8 in the world for the transition to renewable energy. In education, our 2 daughters started preschool at the village primary school when they were 2 and 3 years old, just as this government was coming back into power. They, like 1.2 million school children around the country, would line up with their bowls and spoons to be served a hot meal of beans and rice at recess. The kids who came along just before our daughters were unable to go to high school, as the village school didn't go beyond 6th grade. Now the government has a nationwide program to use rural primary schools for secondary school classes. Kids from 3 villages now work during the week and come to our school for secondary classes on Saturday. Most of our kids' primary school classmates graduated high school, and many are now studying at one of the 80 vocational technical programs or one of the 420 majors offered for free in the public university. Excuse me. Our village now has agronomists, mechanics, doctors, nurses, and accountants, pharmacists, and engineers. In the area of healthcare, when I was 37 weeks pregnant with my daughter Orla in 2007, my neighbor Avelio stopped me on the way to work and asked, "Are you in a hurry?" It turns out that his wife had been in labor all night and needed a ride to the hospital. I was worried because she was silent during the 30-minute trip. She gave birth just 10 minutes after I dropped them off. Now, our pregnant neighbors don't have to worry about traveling when they are pregnant. They can go into the maternal wait home for the last 2 weeks of their pregnancies where they're monitored by doctors. Their moms or sisters can be with them during labor, and they can give birth in the hospital closer to home. Nationwide, the network of nearly 200 maternal wait homes has dropped the maternal mortality rates by nearly 80% over 18 years. These advances in healthcare are so vast, they're nothing short of revolutionary. During the neoliberal years, people literally died outside of hospitals for lack of care. In January, I accompanied an 80-year-old patient to the public hospital who had severe malnutrition, anemia, and a tumor on his head the size of a softball. He had 2 neurosurgeries, spent more than 1 month in the hospital, and walked out miraculously alive and with no bill to pay. Today, Nicaragua has 77% more healthcare workers than in 2006. Not only medical technicians, nurses, and doctors, but Nicaraguan specialists and surgeons trained for neurology, cardiology, spinal surgeries, and fetal surgeries. In infrastructure, despite being only 10 kilometers from Managua, when we moved to the village 20 years ago, every week we had a story about getting stuck in the mud and pulling the truck out with 3 teams of oxen, or the road washing away and having to walk in and out, or the tires going flat constantly from debris carried into the road. In contrast, in 2020, we had 2 Category 4 and 5 hurricanes that hit Nicaragua within 2 weeks. But because we have bridges over every arroyo between our house and town, and much of the roads are paved, we were able to get in and out safely. Our neighbors were able to get to school, to hospitals, get their crops to town, and buses and motorcycle taxis run their full routes year-round. Around the country, the Nicaraguan government has built more than 1,500 new bridges and paved 6,000 kilometers of roads, connecting the Caribbean coast of Nicaragua with the Pacific coast for the first time in history. In agriculture, Nicaragua is an agricultural country, and the Sandinista government has worked to improve productivity in rural areas. They've also worked to include women in the agricultural sector. Many of my neighbors have participated in the Zero Hunger program, which furnishes pigs, a pregnant cow, chickens, seed fertilizers, and building materials to women in rural areas. These assets are put in the woman's name, giving them direct control and more security over food for their children, breaking women's historic dependency on male breadwinners. To date, the Zero Hunger program has aided 275,000 families, benefiting more than 1/6 of the country. In the creative economy, the government also recognizes that micro and small businesses are what drives the Nicaraguan economy, a sort of trickle-up model as opposed to a trickle-down. It's called the creative economy. There are a number of programs that fuel the creative economy. In Ciudad Sandino, where I work, there are women participating in the Zero Usury program. They form solidarity lending groups that receive microloans from the government. Over 800,000 women have received loans at 5% annual interest. An average of $18 million is loaned per year through these programs, and successful groups are encouraged to form women's cooperatives to provide jobs for other women. Thanks to these and other programs that contribute to overall poverty reduction, which benefits women in particular, it helps to reduce domestic violence because women in poverty are more vulnerable to violence and abuse. This improved situation for women has placed Nicaragua among the most gender equal countries in the world. According to the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report, Nicaragua ranks number 6 in the world for gender equality, having closed the gender gap by 80% in just 15 years. Women now participate in all levels of government. By law, 50% of elected offices must be filled by women. Nicaragua now has a co-president model with a male-female pair in the top job, making it the only country in the world where a female co-head of state is mandated in the Constitution. Nicaragua is number 1 in the world for women's educational attainment and number 1 in the world for women in parliament. Although it has the lowest femicide rate in the region, violence against women still exists in Nicaragua, but the government has a clear model to combat it, which prioritizes the prevention, changing attitudes, behaviors, and power relations while also establishing a legal framework to fight gender-based violence. This month, my town of Ciudad Sandino inaugurated its second women's police station for a city of 200,000, making it the 406th such station around the country. These are special units run by all-female police officers. Now women can walk into an all-female police staff to talk to them about crimes committed against them, making it easier and more comfortable for women to file complaints, receive counseling for trauma, and ensure that violent crimes against women are prosecuted in a thorough and timely manner. In the 1980s, people used to say, imagine what Nicaragua could do with just 10 years of peace. We don't have to imagine anymore. This month, the World Happiness Report published that Nicaragua has had the most remarkable improvement in its ranking from 89 out of 100 countries in 2011 to 47 in 2024. In less than a generation, the lives of Nicaragua's impoverished majority have been completely, utterly transformed for the better. Gracias a Dios y la revolución, as we say here, thanks to God and the revolution. Thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Becca. And sorry you had to cope with a cough. You did very well. They're awful, those coughs, aren't they? The more you try to stop them, the worse they get. So thank you for persevering and not getting in the way. That was so interesting, and you've given us so much to think about. It's good to see both the statistical proof, the statistical evidence right alongside the pictures and the evidence of how it absolutely impacts and improves people's lives. And you can see it, can't you, in the health, the way people look so healthy and their happiness. So that was wonderful. Really, there's a feel good, isn't there, to the success. So thank you so much for that presentation. And now we move on to we're also running to time, which is lovely. Move on to John Perry, who lives in Masaya in Nicaragua and regularly writes about politics and the social issues. He's been widely published in various journals, including the Morning Star, Covert Action Magazine, and the London Review of Books. And I always know when I read an article by John Perry, it's so thoroughly researched and so smooth and easy to read, beautifully written, but absolutely beautifully researched as well. So we'll be looking forward now to hearing what you've got to say, John, about the threats that are posed to Nicaragua from the United States. So over to you, John.
Many thanks, Julie. I'm sharing the screen, and I hope that works. Okay, well, all of that Becca has said has been under threat now since 1979, since the revolution. But it's particularly under threat yet again now that Trump has taken over in the United States, and the threats are evolving, if not completely new. And so I thought I'd run through what these threats are, and I'll characterize it as according to who the new president's men are. And I think many of us are aware that one of the key ones is Elon Musk. And strangely enough, he's actually done something that is partially good. He stopped the operation of USAID, which he described as a criminal organization. And in relation to Nicaragua, it was a criminal organization because it was used for regime change activities throughout Latin America. And in fact, Colombia's President Gustavo Petro said, "Take your money with you, it's poison," when he heard the news about USAID being stopped. And it's had an effect on opposition forces in and outside Nicaragua, principally outside, because it's threatened the so-called independent media that were really paid for by the US government, not just in Nicaragua, but in places like Cuba and Venezuela as well. And it's caused something of a crisis in the Nicaraguan opposition. And there are literally dozens of Nicaraguan opposition groups that receive USAID and other forms of US assistance that are now struggling to survive. But of course, we don't know if that's going to be resuscitated in some other form. On some of the slides, I'll put links at the bottom where you can link to articles to look at this in more detail. In terms of USAID in Nicaragua, well, between 2014 and 2021, it spent over $300 million on regime change operations. And most of this money, I did a recent article looking at where this money went, and most of the money went to big US consultancies or to rich media owners, and hardly any of the money went to benefit ordinary Nicaraguans. And we currently have, presumably now stopped, but until recently, a specific $5 million program to undermine the 2021 elections. And then it was still running last year when presumably the US government was trying to undermine Daniel Ortega's government again. But as I said, there's a stop for the moment. We don't know if it will resume. Another key person in the Trump administration is, of course, Marco Rubio, whose family left Cuba before the revolution, but he's fond of saying that he's a victim of Fidel Castro and they had to leave because of communism in Cuba. And because of this, presumably, he's an ardent advocate of sanctions. He's described Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua as illegitimate regimes, which are enemies of humanity. And he was a backer of one of the pieces of legislation, one that's dropped when when Biden lost power or moved out of the Oval Office. And that was the Restoring Sovereignty and Human Rights in Nicaragua Act. So if that is revived, as it may well be, that will create further problems for Nicaragua. His first overseas trip was to Central America. And one of the main purposes of the trip was to go around allies in Central America, working out how to threaten Nicaragua. And he was there in Panama talking about that issue, but also reminding Panama that Trump wants the Panama Canal, or at very least wants less influence of China in Panama. And this is kind of symbolic of really of the new attitude towards Latin America in general and Central America in particular, that the Trump administration regards it very much as as having assets which it ought to be controlling, and China should have no involvement in the area. He's forced the Panamanian government into considering selling their Chinese-controlled supports to a US company, BlackRock, one of the huge US finance companies. And we're waiting on the next steps that they might take in China, in Panama. And if I was Panamanian, I'd be really worried about this, because China has become Panama's biggest export market. And of course, Rubio is threatening Cuba and Venezuela as well. In relation to Cuba, he's restored their state sponsor of terrorism categorization. He's making it difficult for Cubans abroad to send money to Cuba. He's even sanctioning the medical brigades, which Cuba sends to all over the world to developing countries. And they're threatening to end all US travel to Cuba. And in Venezuela, there are new sanctions on Venezuelan oil and threats to countries that import oil from Venezuela. So, you know, there have been no really direct threats against Nicaragua as such, but we're surrounded by countries who are under threat. One of these is Honduras, which is to the north of Nicaragua. It's under massive pressure because Xiomara Castro's progressive government has been expanding public services and reducing poverty, learning many lessons from Nicaragua, I think. But she faces new elections at the end of this year, and she has the blessing of having Laura Dogu as the ambassador in Honduras from the US, who was previously the US ambassador in Nicaragua, where she orchestrated the coup attempt that took place in 2018. So she is working with the elites in Honduras to defeat Libre in 2025, late in 2025. And of course, already Honduras is suffering because migrants are being returned to Honduras and they're losing remittances that are sent from the United States. It's got the biggest US base in Central America, you know, only a few hundred kilometers from Nicaragua. And its foreign minister has said that countries like Honduras will have to find an alternative to relations with the US. But so far, it's been very difficult for them to do so. So the third, all the president's men that I wanted to mention is Mauricio Claver-Carrón, who's a special envoy for Latin America from Donald Trump. He's on the left there. The guy in the middle is Guaido, the putative president of Venezuela for a few years. And Claver-Carrón is the disgraced former head of the Inter-American Development Bank. He lost the position in the bank because of, I think he fell in love with his secretary or something of that kind. And he said that the fact that Nicaragua continues to benefit from the Central American Free Trade Agreement is absurd. And it's also absurd that most of its exports go to the United States. So this is a very serious threat, which has been augmented by the Nicaraguan opposition. The US accounts for about 1/3 of Nicaragua's exports. It's down from over a half a few years ago, but it benefits from favorable terms under the CAFTA trade treaty, and those are under threat. However, it's complicated because many exports involve processing in other Central American countries, for example, the textile exports to the United States. One of the main protagonists arguing for further sanctions in this form against Nicaragua is a former Nicaraguan, Manuel Orozco, now working for the Inter-American Dialogue, which is a think tank that's funded by the arms industry in Washington. But they face obstacles. There's no mechanism in the CAFTA treaty to exclude Nicaragua. But the problem, of course, is that we know that Donald Trump is prone to acting outside the law. And this brings me on to another point that I've been looking at recently. I'm hoping I've got an article coming out this week on this issue. And that's what's one commentator has called the think tank racket. There are at least 9 US think tanks that are promoting sanctions against Nicaragua and Venezuela and Cuba. And of course, they're targeting the poorest Nicaraguans, and they themselves are multi-million-dollar businesses with high salaries, often funded by the US government, the arms industry, or other governments, including the UK. And this includes, these think tanks include Chatham House in London, which has a 20 million budget supported by the US and UK governments and by the arms industry. And it regularly gives platforms to Nicaraguan opposition figures such as Bianca Jagger and the so-called independent journalist Carlos Chamorro. One of the principal activities of these think tanks has been to try to prevent Nicaragua having access to multilateral loans from the big institutions like the World Bank and others. And in fact, the US has more or less halted funding for Nicaragua from the World Bank, costing it $500 million annually, but not from the Central America Bank for Economic Integration, CABE. US think tanks and the Nicaraguan opposition activists have successfully undermined its president, Dante Mosse, who was forced to leave office in 2023. And the US State Department is saying on its website that almost all international financial institutions have stopped issuing new loans to Nicaragua, and most external financing will wind down by 2025. But in actual fact, it hasn't succeeded in doing so, because under the terms of CABE, because Nicaragua is a founding member of CABE, it's still getting loans. And in fact, it's getting loans for water supply projects like the one in that picture there. Then Central America as a whole faces the consequences of Trump's policies on migration. Guatemala, Costa Rica, Panama are all receiving deported migrants from other countries such as Venezuela. El Salvador, as you may have heard, is imprisoning Venezuelans who are being deported from the US allegedly because they're gang members, but it's pretty obvious that most of them aren't. And Nicaragua is sort of quietly cooperating with the US in this sense because it's receiving deported Nicaraguans without making much fuss about it. And I think I'm trying to keep a low profile in this respect. But one area in which it's already being kind of attacked is the ending by Trump of the Biden's plan to brain drain Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela through his humanitarian parole scheme, a horrible term for a scheme which allowed Nicaraguans and others to travel to the States to work for 2 years. Trump has decided to end this scheme in April. 530,000 people have moved to the US through this scheme, around 93,000 of these Nicaraguans, and they'll have to come back or be deported. And this, of course, is one of the threats to remittances, which are an important part of the Nicaraguan economy. 26% of GDP comes from money sent from abroad, principally the United States, but also Costa Rica. And Trump can cut them both by reducing migration into the States, by deporting migrants who are already there, and possibly by taxing or restricting remittances themselves, as he's done in the case of Cuba. So that's a economic threat to Nicaragua that we're waiting to see if it will happen. I wanted to mention some of the eminent, if that's the right word, Nicaraguan opposition figures, all now based in Washington, whose full-time work really is trying to undermine the Sandinista government. And here are 5 of them speaking against Nicaragua at the UN Human Rights Council in April 2023. And I wanted to focus on a couple of these, Felix Maradiaga and Medardo Moreno, just to give you some idea of their background and the questionable status they have to talk about human rights. Medardo Moreno organized mass murders in 2018. His Movimiento Campesino received over $400,000 US from US aid, and he was the leader or one of the co-leaders of the movement. They were responsible for the roadblocks that took place in central and eastern Nicaragua for the 3 months from April to July 2018. And they were responsible for attacks on a number of police stations. The worst was on Morito in July 2018, which led to 5 deaths and 9 police officers being kidnapped and beaten. Then Moreno was arrested the following day trying to leave the country. He was trying to fly to Los Angeles. He was arrested at the airport. This was reported by the BBC when his sentencing took place as a Nicaraguan activist being sentenced to more than 200 years in jail. Well, he was the brains behind a whole series of murders and kidnappings in the central part of Nicaragua. But this goes unnoticed by the BBC, of course. And it also went unnoticed by the human rights organisations. So one that's based in Ireland, Frontline Defenders, actually on its website still has Medalla Morena as a kind of selected prisoner of conscience of their organization, paying no regard, despite being told of his human rights abuses. And here's Felix Maradiaga speaking at the Human Rights Council. He's regularly given so-called evidence to the United Nations, to the Organization of American States and other bodies, condemning human rights violations in Nicaragua. But he avoids condemnation for his own role in organizing the 2018 violence when he was filmed with an armed group organizing attacks in Managua. And when he last spoke at the United Nations, which was in February, he was sponsored by UN Watch, which is an Israeli regime cutout, which relentlessly attacks the UN to shield Israel's system of apartheid. Which brings me to one of the other threats to Nicaragua, which is that because Nicaragua has been supporting as much as it can the Palestinians in relation to the Gaza genocide, it's taken Germany to The Hague for support for in supplying weapons to Israel for the genocide in Gaza. And it was the first country to endorse South Africa's court action in The Hague. It's come under relentless attack from Israel. The Israeli embassy in Costa Rica has accused Nicaragua of having radical Iranian forces and terror groups operating freely in the country, which is clearly absurd. And this has led Felix Maradiaga to call for the Sandinista party to be declared a terrorist organization. Of course, if Nicaragua were to be designated by Washington as a state sponsor of terrorism, that would have very serious consequences for the country. And finally, not to forget the military threat to Nicaragua, Admiral Alvin Halsey is the relatively new head of the so-called US Southern Command, which controls 76 military bases in the region. He believes China is cementing their strategic partnership with Nicaragua by building, of all things, solar energy projects. He's talked about Russia's malign agenda with Bolivia, Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. And Russia is building a vaccine lab in Managua because at the time of COVID, we couldn't produce our own vaccines, and it was very difficult to get access to vaccines because the US wouldn't supply them to Nicaragua, even though it supplied them to Honduras. And his job really is to stop Latin America forming part of a multipolar world. So to conclude, as you've heard from Becca, and I think you'll hear from Nick, Nicaragua's government is very strong, but it does face these huge, new, or relatively new US threats, trade sanctions and exclusions from the local trade treaty, further attempts to close off multilateral loans, possible renewed financing of opposition groups and opposition media, being sanctioned as a state sponsor of terrorism, potentially, and in the background, always the massive US military presence to deter further influence by China and Russia. And I think on that gloomy note, I shall stop there.
Thank you so much, John. That's, as expected, a very detailed and important analysis of the baddies of the wicked people who've actually done a huge amount of damage to Nicaragua, including, as you pointed out, the torture and murder of those victims during the attempted coup. So I think it's really, really important that we have a full understanding of who the people are and what it is that they're doing in the way we're supporting Nicaragua. So thank you again for sharing your detailed research and knowledge with us. And also we're running quite nicely to time, so just a couple of minutes late, but we'll now move on to Nick, who is the Nick Hoskins, who is managing director of the ethical trading company Etico. He's lived and worked in rural Nicaragua with rural Nicaraguan cooperatives since 1988, and he's a member of the executive committee of the Nicaraguan Solidarity Campaign Action Group. So we'll look now at the agricultural successes of Nicaragua. Can I just remind everybody to make sure you're on mute so we don't get any sound interference? Thank you very much. So over to you, Nick. including some.
I hope you're not including me to be on mute as well, Julie, but I assume not. Hi, no, it's great, and thanks to John and Becca. Those were two really, really well-researched and detailed presentations that make my life very easy. And as Julie said, I've lived in Nicaragua since 1988, and quite the great thing about Nicaragua, it's a sort of roller coaster. Just as you think everything's settling down and you're heading off to a certain future, things change. And of course now, Nicaragua, on the one hand, we're living in a really great situation, but of course, as John highlighted there at the end, the threats are really great. And thanks to everyone for joining. And I hope you're going to get a little window, and already have got a good window into Nicaragua. I'm just going to try and explain, because it is a very, very difficult country to sort of understand, and people who are not here do really have a very, very different opinion. That is because of the the extreme manipulation of any information that comes out of Nicaragua, which John has highlighted, the way that, and now we're seeing with USAID and other sources, how media has been financed. But Nicaragua is a small country. It's very proud. It's committed to small businesses, the people, the creative economy, which Becca mentioned. We of course have got a great cooperative sector, which from the revolution, cooperatives have been used as part of the private sector to support and to give social benefit. And Nicaragua, it does have a vibrant, alive rural economy. I mean, it's quite incredible as you drive around on the wonderful new roads and infrastructure. You're driving through rural areas which are dynamic, growing, developing, and very, very in tune with what they produce. So you'll go through coffee regions, you'll go through places where there are loads of salt plains and prawn production, and Nicaragua is defined by what raw materials that it has and what it produces, and it's still very, very in touch. And I think the rest of the world has always been like that. The potteries in the UK, for example, and I just want to emphasize, I know it's most of the people on this call will probably know it, but it's really good to say the cooperative movement, the first cooperatives in the world were born out of the UK, and the UK holds that incredible place in history. And Nicaragua, is in Rochdale with the first cooperatives, and coming out of the Industrial Revolution, a way for people to resist. And Nicaragua really takes that on. Most of my work is within the cooperative movement, and you have a very, very supportive government to cooperatives, promoting them, and who see the value of cooperatives, helping the government, working hand in hand to deliver poverty reduction. And the point I just want to make before sort of moving on is poverty reduction, but also resilience. Nicaragua is ready for whatever aggression. It's a country that adversity will be attempted to be transformed into development and opportunities, and I think that's what happened, especially the 2018 coup attempt, which was so awful. Those awful photographs that John put up there that any of us who were in Nicaragua find very, very disturbing indeed, and I'm sure you do from outside, because it was so real, you know, such a peaceful country. That's the other thing to really understand, is Nicaraguans' deep commitment to peace throughout its history, but that doesn't mean rolling over and allowing yourself to be trodden over. And so 2018 is a real scar, but from that came, you know, this incredible clamping down on all of the money coming into Nicaragua and all of the influence from outside. And one of the ways to make sure everybody was behaving themselves was make sure they were paying their taxes. And so now in Nicaragua, everybody is committed to paying their tax. You know, that's the way to get on and to be part of this society. It's a very, very big cultural change. And I think it was John or Becca who said just before we came on, you know, that Nicaragua is one of the highest tax revenues in Latin America now, percentage-wise. And I was saying that if you would go back 15 years ago, it would have probably had one of the lowest. And so now it's amazing that we're living in a sort of high tax, high revenue society, where hopefully, if they are successful in not allowing all those bank loans from the World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank and everyone, which the reason Nicaragua continues to be able to borrow is because it pays them all back on time and gives the results that for whatever loan it's received, it absolutely makes sure it delivers. So that is why these banks absolutely love lending to Nicaragua, and quite rightly so. So and then all of this is in the context of Nicaragua being a sovereign nation, and that's what you know, you really have to say. Nicaragua is Nicaragua. It's, of course, we're similar, you know, have a similar situation to Cuba and Venezuela, maybe, but Nicaragua is definitely unique. And Nicaragua, you know, is developing its own path through you know, abundance and through some challenging times as well. And so I just wanted to go there. So what are the things that really mark Nicaragua is, you know, how it's sort of poverty reduction has been so spectacular, really, because you do go around and you're a little bit embarrassed at how well everyone's living and how happy people are and relaxed. And I was just saying to my mum this morning just how happy Nicaraguans are, you know, in general, as we took my daughter to school, and everyone was just really nice to you. And we spent far too long in the shop ordering stuff, and the guy behind us was just very patiently waiting and very happy. You know, it's a very relaxed country, and it is a sovereign nation. It's very unique, and that's why it's so difficult for people to understand it. Now, how is it unique? Well, imagine a country where nearly everybody has got access to land. When I say access to land, it comes from the land reform during the revolution, where the land was given to the poor. But I don't think there's anyone I know who wouldn't be able to find someone who would let them plant a little bit of maize, a few beans, and be able to harvest and reap the benefit of the harvest. And, you know, it might be a family member, or they'll be able to rent the land. I mean, it's quite incredible that people really do have access to land, and that comes from the land reform. People are well educated. They do know generally how to read and write, and that comes from way back, the commitment in the literacy campaigns and the commitment to full and free education for everybody, where the commitment to get everybody to school is absolutely unfaltering. And even if that means that you're going to struggle to be able to accommodate all of those people, because it really is free education. We discussed this a bit before. You know, there's no There's no flexibility for hidden charges, where the teacher asks all the parents to make a collection for a broom to sweep up, or for, you know, it is free, you know, and the schools aren't allowed to raise funds from the parents, you know, willy-nilly, or, you know, it is free. And even if there's not quite enough resources for everything, that would be for everyone. And it's the same in hospitals and in health. Nothing can be charged for at all. It's a free health system. Now, so if you're a small, I'm going to talk from the rural sector, you know, if you're a small rural family and you're not spending any money on education or on health, of course you are more competitive, and you're able to, you know, able to produce products at a competitive rate. And this is one of the arguments I'm going to be making, is that Nicaragua is actually, by sticking to its roots of being a sort of country that comes from agriculture, and it was and it's still, each area is still very, very committed to what it produces. That has meant that other countries in Central America, so-called developed, are really struggling with sovereignty and food sovereignty. So, you know, I've spoken to Salvadorians and to people from Costa Rica, and they're extremely worried that they actually can't almost afford to milk the cows, make the cheese, plant the beans, harvest the beans. They you know, they're ending up coming to Nicaragua to buy them. These are the people I've met, and they really see Nicaragua as the place that is going to be feeding itself, but also maybe feeding Central America. So if there were ever to be enormous distortions in Nicaragua being able to sell to the US, who still is their major market, that would propel Nicaragua to produce for neighboring countries, El Salvador, Guatemala, Costa Rica, Honduras, and also something that really, you know, would be incredibly exciting, and it is happening with the creative economy, which Becca was referring to, where small businesses are producing new products, developing new things. Is Nicaragua can also consume more products that it produces in a more innovative way, and increase its nutrition and its diet, improve it, because the things that Nicaragua produce are real high quality. So, you know, understanding Nicaragua as well, Nicaragua is still feeding itself on tortillas, you know, the basic thing that people eat is tortillas and beans, and then cheese, and that is all locally produced. The tortillas are made by women in the barrio, in the community, who every day grind the maize, make the tortillas, and 2-3 cordobas each. I think it's 2.5, 3 now, which is nothing. I mean, it's 36 cordobas to the dollar, roughly 50 cordobas to the pound, for those who want to work it out. And that would be your sort of bread equivalent or potatoes equivalent. And then beans, which is really healthy. That same woman or a neighbour would be boiling up a big pot of beans, and the people in the neighbourhood would just buy them. That, sadly, of course, fast food is coming in, but there's a complete commitment to supporting. Many of those women will be in the government programs of Usura Cero, which Becca mentioned, and they will be supported. They are valued. And then any people making, you know, nut butters from the seeds and nuts, and you know, there are loads of initiatives of small young people just developing their businesses, and they're fully supported by the government, but they're independent businesses. So I think, you know, that's the commitment of the government. It's all these little, Julie was talking about it just before we got onto the call. It's just an incredibly complex amount of small ways that people are helped. I mean, social housing. When I said people have access to land, everybody in Nicaragua can see a route to getting their own home, free of any debt. Absolutely. I can't think of anyone who wouldn't be able to see a route to basically building and living in their own home, however humble or not humble, but there really is a route. And coming from the UK, I really struggle to see how young people are going to be able to see a route to being able to own their own home. And imagine the mortgage payment or paying rent. Imagine taking that out of the equation. Imagine taking out of the equation having to pay for your children's university when it comes to it, and maybe even parts of their education. Imagine taking out, I mean, at least in the UK, we still have free healthcare, if you can get it, and the waiting lines. But so, you know, it really, really does make a difference. Now, I wanted to...
Nick, are we okay to be finishing off now?
Yeah, of course. No, I'm ready to finish off. So I wanted to emphasise, because we've talked a lot about the government, I did want to say that the government also supports the cooperatives to support in this poverty reduction, and we were directly involved with the coffee cooperatives doing the first cupping labs in the world, where we raised the quality of coffee for local consumption, but also for export. And so suddenly Nicaragua was exporting high quality coffee. Nicaragua, in nearly everything it produces, it's high quality with the same dynamic. In Sesame, that I was really involved with, and Becca talked about gender and the gender equality. From Nicaragua, we did the first recognition of unpaid work for women in ingredient supply chain to Body Shop and with L'Oreal, with full support in not a direct hands-on governing way, but just being facilitated to be successful. And now currently we're doing really exciting, I saw George on the call, we're doing really exciting work with music therapy and with the Guildhall, and it's just exciting how, you know, things which are for the maybe quite elitist in the UK, music therapy and I don't know, I thought of it as elitist, but when you really do it on the ground in Nicaragua, how it's done in a community way, is really exciting. So yeah, I'm gonna finish up, because hopefully there'll be some questions and I'll carry on. And I think I was going to talk about cheese, I was going to talk about cacao, but I'll leave that, Julian. We can keep on time, and I'm sure there might be an opportunity if there are some good questions. We want some nice participation from you all, because to hear
Thank you
what
so
your
much, Nick.
questions are.
And I know you could talk for hours about all the wonderful things that are happening in Nicaragua, and I know because you're involved in food production, having just loved the food in Nicaragua and it being such high quality, I think the more you talk about it, the hungrier I get, because I just remember how wonderful all the food was, and how central it is to people eating well, and you know, eating healthily, and the quality of the food, the organic nature, and the fair trade elements of it as well. So I think we've had two fantastic insights into the wonderful successes and the depth and breadth of all the wonderful things that are happening in Nicaragua, set against John's reminding us of the power of that threat from the United States. And you know, it's difficult to believe, isn't it, when you hear about all the wonderful things that are happening, how humanity is loved and nurtured, and you know, that growth of humanity that you have in Nicaragua. And yet I think it was Marco Rubio describes it as one of the countries that's a threat to humanity. It beggars belief. So that's been a wonderfully illuminating thing. And I'm just going to say now, if you can't go to Nicaragua yourself, and I'd strongly urge you to find a way to go. It's wonderful to have listened to these very first-hand real life accounts from Becca, John, and Nick. So thank you again to the three of you for sharing your knowledge and you know, such wonderful talks with us all. So I don't seem to have got the questions on the screen, but please do put your hand up. But have I missed any questions? We've got one from Andrew there. I just catch the hands first. Andrew, any more questions? Anybody else? Any other hands? Andrew, James. So Andrew, go first.
Yeah, it was I remember I grew up in Ireland, and I remember watching the revolution unfold in 1977 to 79 and how inspired we were by it, and it's been inspirational listening to people speak this evening as well. And I'm very proud that my Unison branch down here in Kent is affiliated to Nicaragua Solidarity. But the question I had was, I was good to hear about the cooperatives. But I just wondered, how is the leadership of the cooperatives? How is that decided? Are they elected, or if maybe somebody could explain something about that?
So probably Nick, you're
Yeah,
the best place for that, aren't you?
I'm very happy to answer that. And actually, I decided to be here. If you see behind, I'm in CONACOP, it's the Consejo Nacional de Cooperativas. So it's the National Cooperative Committee. And I asked permission to Ariel Bucardo, who is the president of CONACOP, who is elected by the cooperative movement. So the way it's organised is you have this sort of gremial union side of representation in CONACOP, wholly elected by the cooperatives themselves. And the way it works is that you get third level co-ops, federations would get a vote, second level co-ops would get a slightly smaller vote, and first level co-ops. So it sort of respects the integrational nature of Nicaragua. And then there's a full committee of other members who are elected also and come from the different sectors. So transport, I'm very linked to the agricultural cooperatives who are strong, but there's also the transport ones. So it's fully, yeah, absolutely fully. And Ariel was recently re-elected, which made us all very happy because it's quite a complex time and we need his experience. And he is a union man from birth. He was vice president of the UNAG all the time. And so he's absolutely clear. I wish I was here just I could have pulled him in to answer you. You'd have loved it. So yeah, fully. And every cooperative is elected by its members. There is no influence from government at all. It's completely private sector, but is of course a different thing to a normal private company.
Many thanks there, Nick, and thanks for your question, Andrew. So James and then Barbara.
Well,
Hi. Yeah, I always hated in these things when people ask a question and then make a statement, but I just wanted to start with some data about the poverty figures, which Becca mentioned. We always hear this figure of 24.9% in 2016, reduced from 48% in 2007, which is great. Now, that's because there was a World Bank report at that point, which is kind of official statement. But the World Bank do keep on monitoring it. They're a little bit erratic about what comes out. But if you look at statement from last October, they mention in passing that the poverty rate in 2022 was 13.1%, 2023 down to 12.5%. So the evidence is that since 2016, poverty has reduced massively from that point. Anyway, on to the question. John was talking about how the exports to the US have reduced from 50% down to about 1/3 now. I'm not quite sure what period of time that is. I suppose the question is sort of, where is that going? Is that a trend which will continue? Is Nicaragua making efforts, particularly to build trade with China, I suppose would be the obvious one, and maybe build trade in other directions, which can have the effect of taking us, so that if the US ends up blocking trade exports from Nicaragua to the US, whether there's a system in place to deal with that.
Thank you, James, and that's over to you, John, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, well, James, the short answer is yes. The exports to the US are principally things like textiles, which are complicated because they're produced in different stages and involve more than Nicaragua in Central America. I think some of the exports go via Guatemala or El Salvador. and basic foodstuffs like coffee and beef. And you probably remember there was a campaign against Nicaragua beef on the basis that it was conflict beef at one stage, which thankfully was stopped fairly quickly. But these exports are very important. I think it's 36% of exports are still go to the States. And as you say, what the government is trying to do is to diversify its export markets. It's particularly concentrating on China. I mean, I think the percentage with China is still quite small. I think it's still in single figures, but it's going up from basically zero a couple of years ago. And they're trying to export things like sea cucumbers, prawns, coffee, various products from Nicaragua to China. And there's almost weekly news about new export markets with China. And certainly China is investing a lot in the country, a lot of private Chinese investment in Nicaragua. So I'm sure the links will grow very quickly.
Many thanks, John. It's be nice to welcome you, Barbara, to ask your question. Barbara is, if you don't mind me saying, sorry, lovely to see you, Barbara, as a long-standing solidarity activist in the United States. So it's lovely to thank you for joining ours. I've been to so many of your webinars, so lovely to see you. And please go ahead.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm sorry I had to arrive late because of another obligation. So I came in during Nick's presentation, and I was just hoping that he could add a couple of words about cheese. And I think the other one he mentioned was cacao. Was that right? And I'm wondering what the co-ops are doing and where their exports are going.
To you, Nick.
Yeah, no, so I was going to talk about cheese because Nicaragua really is a country that still has dairy herds, has milk. The co-ops have plants to transform that milk into cheese. We're working to support a cooperative which got into trouble and supported through that process. And the markets for that cheese are El Salvador, absolutely. So your pupusas in the US that you might be eating that could be even made in El Salvador and sent up as little whole pupusas will very likely have Nicaraguan quesillo, special quesillo which the Salvadorians have taught the Nicaraguans to make. And also for the whole nostalgic market in the US, fried cheese for frying. So if you'll ever get fried cheese in the Latino sort of chicken and chips with a big bit of fried cheese, or in the fritangas they have there, that may well be cheese coming from Nicaragua and coming from the co-ops. Co-ops are probably 34% of the cheese market. And then cacao is exciting because Nicaragua has wonderful cacao. It's being promoted, it's growing in importance. There's a sort of initial attempt of people making chocolate and consuming it locally, but also there are opportunities for cacao to be exported with the very high cacao prices at the moment, and Ivory Coast and Ghana struggling to deliver the market, and everyone feeling they don't want to be dependent on them. It's a great opportunity for Nicaragua as well. So there you go. Thanks for asking.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Barbara. And David Raby, and then Tim Oxton. Over to you, David.
Thank you. Yes, well, first of all, just in terms of the diversification of trade, I was pleasantly surprised to find in the last couple of weeks at our local convenience store here in Norwich, the bananas which are marketed by Fifes, which of course is a multinational, were produce of Nicaragua. But my question is this: I'd like to know more about relations with neighboring countries, in particular Honduras and Costa Rica.
Becca, do you want to say anything there about that, Ciudad Sandino? Well, do you want to add something?
About the neighboring countries, or about the
neighboring countries, yeah.
Yeah, I know that you know, Nicaragua does have very good relationships with other Central American countries and is very dedicated to Central American integration. That having been said, there are difficulties with relationship to Costa Rica as usual. There's a lot there. A lot of Nicaraguans go to Costa Rica to work, and sometimes on a personal or cultural level that can be difficult. I know John knows a lot about that as well. Nicaragua has good relationship with Honduras as well. And of course with the current Honduran government, but also has worked with all the governments in Central America, trying to maintain that Central American integration. John, I don't know if you want to mention something more about that relationship, which has gotten more complicated recently with the integration.
Yes, I think it's very unfortunate because Nicaragua has had a history of trying to work together with all of the Central American governments, regardless of their political complexion. And it's really been important, I think, since the revolution that the Sandinista governments have worked with whatever color of government, as it were, in Costa Rica or Panama or El Salvador, and in fact has a kind of working relationship with President Bukele in El Salvador, even though he's extreme right wing. But the US is trying to undermine that and has been partially successful. I mentioned in my talk the way that it was trying to get the countries to gang up against Nicaragua in CABE, the Regional Development Bank. It's trying to encourage them to gang up against Nicaragua in CAFTA, the trade treaty, and it successfully got them to gang up against Nicaragua in the Central America integration system, which is called CDCA, where Nicaragua is supposed, under the sort of terms of the agreement with the other countries, to hold the secretariatship of CDCA at the present time, and isn't being allowed to, and so the whole process has ground to a halt. So yes, in principle, we have very good relations with other countries. The ones with Honduras, I think, are probably more, you know, kind of not very public, because, you know, it's inconvenient for Honduras to be seen to be a very strong ally of Nicaragua's, but I'm sure the relationships are in fact very strong. But it's the US that's undermining other regional relationships, and Nicaragua is starting to suffer from that.
So thank you very much, John and Becca, for your answer and for your question, David. So finally, our last question of the evening, then Tim, over to you.
Thank you. I'd just like to ask one or more of the panelists to comment on the current situation regarding the canal, the canal from the Pacific to the Atlantic, which I believe is likely to be financed mainly by China. This would absolutely would undermine Trump's concern about the Chinese being in too much control of the Panama Canal. They'd be in a much stronger position with a Nicaraguan canal, but it's not going to be completed anytime soon. When's it going to start?
So, John, is that your question? Oh, sorry, John, Nick. Oh.
I'm happy. I did have that on my. I was going to talk about infrastructure and the incredible current infrastructure, and then the future infrastructure, because it's not just a canal. It's two incredible deep water ports, one in the Atlantic, one in the Pacific. Yeah. I've met with the head of the port in Corinto. They're quadrupling the capacity. They've got an absolutely state-of-the-art container distribution center in the pipeline as well. And all of that is part of the canal project for the future. And then they've got a big road going down the coast, and it actually gets to Corinto. There's going to be I think the largest airport in Central America, Punta Huete, I think it is, just on the other side of the lake. That's also been announced, where big planes will be able to come straight to Nicaragua from any other continent. So it's not just the canal. Nicaragua is a sort of logistics hub, and of course you're looking at it that way, but the other way is the Chinese being kicked out of the Panama Canal will all hopefully come running to Nicaragua along with everybody else who doesn't feel safe in the Panama Canal. And the non-aligned world will have their canal in Nicaragua, and Nicaragua will be in a significant country in the world, and and that would just be immeasurable poverty reduction. And of course, the environmental concerns that many people will have are valid, but it's an incredible global development for Nicaragua, and will put Nicaragua on the map. But along with all these other incredible it's not just the canal. There's a whole thing with the lake as well. I don't know if you've been to Nicaragua. The whole of the front of the lake has developed for recreation and is a park for the population. And from there, you're going to be able to get ferries out to all of the little remote areas where there are little ports being built as well. So there's an incredible big picture. This is the Nicaragua I would love to see thing going on. And yeah, other people aren't going to like it, and some others may love it. So we'll see what happens.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you, Tim, for your question. I think it's a nice note to come to an end on that. You know, you're very much there talking about Nicaragua as a tourist destination. So whether you're able to come, as I've been fortunate to do as a delegate from your trade union, and if your trade union doesn't send delegations to Nicaragua, see what you can do. But also, its tourism's really superb. And you know, I think one of the criticisms about the work is the kind of the damage to the environment. But Nicaragua has just such a fantastically strong record on environmental protection. From, you know, since during the 1980s, it was in the forefront of environmental protection. So I think there's some sort of great environmental tourism, but it is a wonderful place to visit. So do try and go there. But also, if you can't go there, speak to us again, and hopefully we'll have more webinars. Really, I'm very, very grateful to the speakers this evening who've given us a wonderful insight into all the many wonderful interconnected plans that Nicaragua has to raise the standard of living for its people, to improve their quality of life. And you've really given us a lovely insight into that. So thank you very much to John, Nick and Becca for your presentations this evening. Thank you so much to everybody who's signed up and come along, and hopefully you'll be joining us again in future webinars. And if you're not a member, I think Louise has put the details in the chat for you to become a member. But once again, your solidarity with Nicaragua is very, very important and very valued. So thank you very much to everybody for your participation this evening. Thanks again, Becca, John and Nick. And also, I think it's important to say to the team behind, to Louise and Helen, who've done all the work here, and I think probably you, James, as well, in order to make this a sort of technical possibility and a success. So thank you very much. So looking forward to seeing you at a future webinar and at future Nicaragua Solidarity events. So thank you very much, everybody, for your participation tonight. And this evening will be recorded for you to see again. Thank you. Viva Nicaragua.
Extraordinario, sí, ese atardecer está divino. ¿Qué horas son, entre otras cosas?